So, you know, it's quiz 3 time. And it's also very nearly midterm time.
When is that?
When is that? Let me bounce the question back to you all. Does anybody know?
Well, I think the dates are wrong, so that's, I don't know.
Shocker. Let me double check that. I'm sure you're right. Well,
It would be like a week before spring break.
let's see, what,
Did you say we're turning it in March 15th?
oh, no. It is officially opens on Thursday. So study guide is up. I'm trying to pull up the course schedule here now. It's on the original syllabus. I don't know why it's not displaying. But yeah, it's here Tuesday, February 23, quiz 3, Thursday, midterm. And then we have a few lectures, and actually you will take quiz 4 before spring break. So that at least makes things less painful when we come back from spring break. But yeah. Now, it says Thursday. Of course, I'm going to leave it open through at least our next class meeting, so you don't have to take it until early next week if you
The
want
midterm?
to.
The midterm?
So, even though it says Thursday, it's not like you're going to come in here and take it and you got 2 days to study. You can take several more days. You can study through the weekend, you know, and then take it on Monday or
When does
Tuesday
it
next week.
close? When does it close?
I haven't set it up yet, but I would leave it open at least through the next class day, which would be Tuesday, March 2. So you've got, essentially a week to prepare. Does that make sense?
And we'll take it on computer?
Say again?
We'll take it on iPhone?
It'll be the same as the quizzes, just a little bit longer, obviously. A combination of short written response and multiple choice, just like the quizzes. The only difference here is, like I said, you'll have, I think an hour and a half to do it. Plus a 15-minute grace period, and also I've given you a study guide, which is essentially just a list of terms. And it looks like a lot of terms, but obviously for all of these, you don't need to have like a page of notes. Some of them is very, very simple. And some of them sort of are lumped together, so it's maybe not as intimidating of a list as it looks, and it of course is all taken directly from the PowerPoint lecture outlines. There's not one single term on there that is not from one of our PowerPoint lecture outlines. Furthermore, I'm not going to ask you questions on the documents on the exam. That's a quiz only thing, so you don't have to go back and reread Richard Brethorn and all that shit. No document questions on the exam, strictly lecture questions. Does that make sense? I forget exactly how many questions it would be, but it would be, the equivalent of a couple of quizzes lumped together, again, that you could reasonably take in an hour and a half period of time, or technically actually an hour and 45 minutes. So, questions will be similar to what you've seen. In fact, there may be some that are identical from the quizzes that you've taken. Of course, there will be some stuff that you were not asked about on the quizzes too, and that's why you have this terms list here. And the good thing about getting this over with and done with soon is it's not a cumulative final exam, first half, second half, so once you get this taken and over and done with, you're sort of through the first half of the class, and we don't look back. That make sense? Questions about that or anything else? That's all clear? Okay. I would say everybody's gonna be ready Thursday, but I don't expect to log on Thursday and see a whole lot of people having taken it. I suspect it'll be more like next week, and that's totally fine. That being said, whoever's scheduled to be in here on Thursday, basically I'll just come in and sort of answer what questions you have in terms of review. So there's no new content or anything on Thursday, strictly a review day, which is what today is. But
Tomorrow, this Thursday this week?
yes, Thursday is in 2 days from now is when it'll open. It'll stay open through the early part of next week. So you'll have a week or so to study and get ready and be confident when you open it up and take it. What else? Well, first things first, you got to knock out quiz 3 before we get to that point. So kind of set that aside in your mind for now. And you did have some documents to read for quiz 3. So, and I think all but one of these I mentioned in lecture in class, so this shouldn't be totally alien to you. The first is a speech that Abraham Lincoln gives in Peoria, Illinois, in which he is very upset. And you should be able to tell me what specifically is it that he's upset about. He is going off, railing about something very specific that has come out of Congress that he does not much like. And that will be one of the major impetus for he and other people leaving the Whig Party, and in his case, eventually joining the brand new Republican Party. So what is Lincoln pissed off about is kind of focus number 1. And then you'll see the letter that I mentioned that he writes to Horace Greeley, the newspaper editor. You remember this? Where he kind of lays out what his policy is in terms of the slavery question as Greeley posed it. And Lincoln, of course, says that his priority is what? Right. To preserve the Union. And then he says, what I do with slavery is secondary to that. So you should know that. And then know, too, kind of how he lays out this three-part list of possibilities in terms of what he might do with slavery. And each and every one of those 3, he's saying what really matters is preserving the Union. Slavery and its fate is secondary to that. And then you could read from what I also referenced in lecture, the Black Codes of the state of Mississippi. And you know that the real purpose of those Black Codes is to limit the rights and freedoms of former slaves and to recreate conditions of slavery wherever legally possible. So you should be able to tell me, what are some of those rights that are limited, and how or in what way would the Black Code of Mississippi tend to recreate conditions of slavery for former slaves? And then the final document that you read was this story of a man named Elias Hill. And you should know who he is and what he has done other than just being black and a former slave. Why is it that the Ku Klux Klan is targeting this man? Who is he, and why is it that of all people the Klan has picked him to come and do violence to and intimidate and threaten? This gives you an idea about the workings of the Klan in that iteration, in that period of time. That earliest version of the Ku Klux Klan. And that will cover you for the documents. And then you're looking at lecture questions. The 3 lectures were sectionalism and the lead up to the Civil War. The lecture on the war and emancipation and the story of how the war becomes one of emancipation, even though, as you know from the first lecture of this period, that's not what it was to begin with. And then there was the Reconstruction lecture. So those are your 3. In terms of that first sectionalism lecture, I really focused in the second half of that on, after sort of laying out what is sectionalism, what are the compromises that kept America together throughout the 1820s, 30s, 40s, Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, and then I spent a lot of time talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And so you should be able to tell me what was significant about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I made the case that you could draw a sort of direct line, if you wanted to, or sort of make a case that you could, between the passage of Kansas-Nebraska and the outbreak of the war. and sort of cause and effect, one thing leads to another and another. So if you could walk me through that and say, hey, here's why Kansas, Nebraska was such a big deal. These are all the things that happened in the aftermath of the passage of that. That would be ideal, especially if you could tell me how the Supreme Court weighs in on that. One of the things we talked about in terms of the aftermath or fallout of Kansas, Nebraska was what effect that has in terms of America's electoral politics. And we talk about the death of the Whig Party and the rise then of the brand new at that time Republican Party. Tell me who those Republicans were. It was a coalition of different groups. You should be able to tell me what groups, and if they had different ideas, and they did, what was the one single idea that they held in common? Well, what brought them together under that banner or in that coalition? And then the war, we talked about secession. You should be able to identify which states seceded and which states didn't secede that might have seceded. Remember the so-called border states? You should be able to tell me what those were. And we talked a little bit about the war and the battlefield history. And if you look on the study guide, I do have a handful, I think maybe 2 or 3 of the battles listed that you want to know a little something about. But what I was more interested in that lecture was that process whereby the war shifts from being one to preserve the Union or to keep slavery out of the Western territories to eventually, by the end of 1863, as Abraham Lincoln makes clear in the Gettysburg Address, a war of slavery versus freedom, as they have reframed it. I want you to tell me, what role did the Emancipation Proclamation play in that? And remember how I spent a good bit of time kind of tearing it down and saying, yeah, well, the Emancipation Proclamation kind of didn't free anybody. And it was mostly slaves freeing themselves. And it would depend on the Union Army winning and so on. But then I sort of built it back up and said, hey, though, here's still what's really important about it. A couple things. So you should be able to lay that out in terms of what did I say the Emancipation Proclamation kind of did or didn't do. And if I did tear it down a little bit, why is it still important? And then Reconstruction, you should certainly be able to differentiate between presidential Reconstruction and congressional. What's different about Reconstruction once the radical Republicans in Congress take over from Johnson after they impeached him, who was carrying out Lincoln's policy as initially set forth in the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. So you should be able to tell me, hey, here's what Congress did when they took over. Here's how Reconstruction looked different than under the presidential plan. Here's some requirements that Congress added that weren't a part of Reconstruction under Lincoln and Johnson. Or here's how it's more stringent than the original policy, which was quite lenient, and so on. And of course, we talked about how under Congress for a time, when the Union Army's in the South, the Force Acts are in play, you've reset the process of Reconstruction with much more stringent guidelines, requirements. That leads to that period of Black Reconstruction where Black people in the South can actually vote and elect representatives, and they do in large numbers. But I want you to be able to tell me, what is the period that follows from mid-70s or so to 1900 or so, the period white Southerners would look back and call the Redemption. What does that mean? What were they redeeming or getting back? How did they achieve that? What could or did they do to sort of get around the realities of the 14th and 15th Amendments? So that allows you to kind of paint with a broad brush in a written response to talk about that the broad changes or even throw at me some specifics. And that's, of course, the last thing that we talked about there in that reconstruction lecture. So that would cover generally what I'm going to be looking for in quiz 3. That all make sense? Questions? I can't remember if you guys are just a particularly prescient and smart group, or if people have learned that when I'm up here talking about these are the things you should think about for quiz fill in the blank, that probably you should be writing that down. I can see that everyone is doing that. There have been times where I have these sessions and I'm doing this and people are staring into space, not writing down a word, and I'm like, okay, it's your law. Anyway, all right, well, if there are any questions, that is all I have. So enjoy your rest of your afternoon and your weekend, and obviously once you've knocked out, oh, not your weekend, I'm sorry, it's Tuesday. I turned 40 today, so I'm old. And thank you. I appreciate it.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
What do you do for your birthday?
Eat a really nice dinner paid for by not me, my dad.
That's always
Yeah.
what my mom says. She says whenever we celebrate her birthday, she's like, I don't care what you do.
Yep.
I want 2 things. I want to be around all y'all guys because I
Yep.
like you.
Yep.
And she's like, and I don't want to cook.
Yeah, somebody take care of it other than me. I don't have to cook it, buy it. My dad's got plenty of money, he'll pay for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's about it, but yeah, thank you.
You wanna buy me a dinner tonight too?
Sure.
Let's go.
You like Timber
Starving.
House in Decatur? That's where we're gonna
Where
go.
is it?
It's in Decatur, an old train depot called Temple House. They have really excellent cocktails and,
Ooh,
Yeah,
that sounds super
We'll be
fancy.
there.
it is, yeah.
We'll see you there at 7 o'clock.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.